Hello and welcome back to part 4 of How Anarchism Works. Now if you're new to the series, you'll probably want to go back and start with part 1. There's a link in the description. Otherwise, let's talk about how art and science might work in an anarchist society. Chapter 10, Dull Conformity. A common refrain of capitalist propaganda is that life would become dull, gray, and conformist under any form of communism. Reactionaries love to point to the popular conception of Soviet-style uniformity and social stagnation when discussing socialism, making the claim that capitalism, through the motive of profit, leads to far more and better creative output. Now I can totally see why people might think that. After all, a capitalist society isn't dull and conformist in the least. I mean, in the USA, every town is vibrant and rich with unique local culture. Okay, enough sarcasm. I just think it's fair to say that capitalism itself leads to increasingly bland conformity as it advances. Strip malls, Starbucks, and subways overtake our towns and cities as national corporations bulldoze local culture and replace it with cookie-cutter big box stores. We all know the story, we see it happening all around us every day. But there are deeper and more troubling issues when it comes to capitalistic domination of the arts and sciences. Chapter 11, Subjective Needs. The ideas we've discussed so far in this series have all been concerned with material needs. That is to say, meeting the conditions required for survival. Food, shelter, healthcare, personal safety, and so on. But what about the higher callings of humanity? I'm talking about creative and intellectual expression and innovation. Art and science and building and collaborating. The human animal craves this kind of constructive activity. I think we can generally agree that most of us need art and entertainment as well as the fruits and benefits of scientific innovation in order to be truly happy. Abraham Maslow, the famous mid-20th century psychologist, referred to these as self-actualization needs. What a person can be, they must be, is the general idea. We all want to achieve our true potential in life, and any decent society should give us all the opportunity to self-actualize. In her fantastic video on Dadaism, which you should totally watch by the way, Angie of Angie Speaks describes these higher needs as subjective needs.
Art serves a higher purpose that fulfills the abstract spiritual needs within human nature that cannot be quantified by its material merit.
I think I'll stick with that because it's a lot less of a mouthful than self-actualization needs, but no matter what you call them, these are needs that go beyond mere survival. On a certain level, all humans have the desire to create, to socialize, to relax, to enjoy life, and to build things. And make no mistake, subjective needs are incredibly important. To give you an idea of what life would be like with all material needs met, but no subjective needs met, think of a prisoner in solitary confinement. They're given clothing, food, a bed to sleep in. If they get really sick, they might even be allowed to see a doctor, if they're lucky. But beyond that, they're completely cut off from every opportunity for self-expression, intellectual activity, or creative outlet. In conditions like these, human beings will quickly develop severe mental illness. Even domesticated animals like dogs and chickens and pigs will suffer tremendously if none of their subjective needs, such as socialization and enjoying the outdoors, are met. So it's pretty clear that subjective needs are incredibly important and must be a high priority for any anarchist society. But before we can address how we'll deal with the arts and sciences under anarchism, let's take a look at how capitalism deals with our subjective needs. Chapter 12, Creative Commodification and Gatekeeping under Capitalism. In our current capitalist society, the state and capitalists have a stranglehold on artistic and scientific development. In order for an individual to engage in art or science, they must either be wealthy and fortunate enough to have copious amounts of money and free time to create, or they must allow their creative output to be commodified by capitalists or arbitrated by the state. Let's take a look at the art world first. Now, I'm an artist myself, so this is a bit personal for me. I know very well the struggles a working class artist faces under capitalism, and to understand these struggles, we must first understand the artist. Artists are simply human beings who have a strong desire to express themselves and create things that other human beings can enjoy and consider and appreciate. Now, I happen to believe that there's an artist inside each of us and that art can take many different forms, but under capitalism, art as expression in and of itself has no value. It's only art as a commodity, that is art that can be bought and sold and monetized, that's considered worthy.
Do me a favor, grab my butt!
Artists are driven to create, whether we receive monetary compensation or not. There's certainly some cynical artists who are more concerned with trying to bank on their art than they are with expressing themselves, but for the most part, under capitalism, the opposite is true. The majority of artists are forced to commoditize our art for the market. Visual artists must become graphic designers for marketing firms, filmmakers must produce 30-second commercials for corporate brands, even comedians and musicians must make compromises on their material to meet market demands.
I will not bow to any sponsor.
If I want to create art as expression instead of art as a commodity, I must have the free time and other resources to create, which is very hard to come by when you have to work a full-time job just to survive. This means that the capitalist class and the super wealthy have much greater opportunity to create art as expression, while working class artists have strict limitations placed on our subjective needs. In my past, I've been heavily involved in liberal-led attempts to solve these problems under capitalism. I've volunteered on arts councils and art business incubators, and I've talked to hundreds of artists about these issues. The liberal solution is to develop the business skills of artists and to teach them ways to make the art they produce marketable. In other words, we're told to transform our art as expression into art as a commodity. We're asked to compromise our subjective needs to serve the agenda of the capitalist class. Writers and musicians and painters are told to do market research and to find ways to monetize our output and to spend time marketing ourselves and finding buyers for our works. Of course, liberals will typically advocate for the state to step in and assist in supporting artists. Subsidies and state grants should help artists who have few other opportunities to express themselves, right? But see, the state serves the interests of capitalists. I've been on selection boards for art grants before, and I know that these programs always serve the capitalist agenda. Artists are typically selected based on how their art will benefit businesses and elected officials in some way, and hierarchies quickly become established in art communities. These serve to gatekeep artists who won't serve these interests from ever being able to participate or benefit from such programs. Artists who are able to navigate and leverage these hierarchies might manage to survive, even thrive under these conditions, but the vast majority of artists I've talked to share a common refrain. This is not fulfilling. Having to package and promote our art as a product is devastating for the artist and severely limits artistic expression. It's just not the way humans want to create. It's not good for the art, nor for the artists, nor for those of us who enjoy consuming art. The only people who benefit from this situation are the capitalists who shape the system which they profit from. The situation for science might seem very different from that of art on the surface. After all, capitalism depends on scientific innovation, doesn't it? Corporations invest heavily in research and development, and technology has advanced rapidly under capitalist society, correct? Well, let's take a closer look. Now, a lot of people would argue that competition is great for innovation since so many companies have to fight it out to bring newer and better products to the market. But remember, under capitalism, the only definition of better that really matters is more profitable. Of course, with science, just as with art, there are government research grants that go towards things like vaccines and medicines and other innovations that benefit society, but these grants always serve the capitalist agenda as corporations are allowed to profit from the fruits of this taxpayer-financed research. Pharmaceutical companies only research medicine that will bring profits. Tech companies force their engineers to fixate on problems of profitability, with emphasis placed on driving down production costs and driving up revenues. Considerations like end-user satisfaction, environmental impact, and product durability are secondary to making more money for the capitalists who own the company. In fact, products are often made to be more destructive to the environment and less durable and functional for the end user simply because it will make the capitalists who own the company a higher profit margin. Scientists and engineers are limited in what projects they can pursue by the capitalist class.
We're scientists. We need to change the world. You've got the best scientific equipment money can buy. You employ 3,000 research staff. We've created 521 patents. This is the finest laboratoire in the Western Hemisphere. Surely we can...
You can change the world with Garnier Body Cocoon and Soft Curl Cream.
Even the public sector universities are increasingly becoming tainted by capital. And there are cases where capitalists have simply bought out the public sector altogether, such as when Uber stole 50 people from one of the top robotics labs at Carnegie Mellon, completely gutting the program to build self-driving cars that will profit the capitalists who own the company, all with the ambition, of course, of eventually laying off the 2 million drivers they currently employ. Chapter 13, Creative Alienation. Under capitalism, the vast majority of creators are alienated from their own creations. If you're writing music or designing a machine while employed by a corporation, you will not own the product of your own labor. The songs you write or the patents you file will belong to the corporation you work for. Even if you try to become an independent producer, you will still be alienated from your creative output because you must compromise your vision to meet market demands if you want any hope of keeping a roof over your head while you create. In addition, capitalism puts me in a position where other artists are my competition. We must vie against each other in a marketplace of art, which often precludes collaboration and alienates us from one another in many ways. Corporate secrecy, patents, and anti-competition regulations prevent the scientific community from sharing data and discoveries openly with one another. Two scientists who are studying the same phenomenon or two engineers who are trying to solve the same problem are banned from sharing notes and working together because they work for different companies. And in such an environment where teams of scientists and engineers are set against each other by their employers, scientific collaboration stagnates. And then there are all the barriers to participating in scientific and technological innovation under capitalism. Before you can have a career in science and technology, you first have to obtain an expensive and time-consuming education that's just beyond the reach of most workers. And then you have to commit to wage servitude in order to obtain access to the equipment and other resources needed to engage in scientific discovery. Who knows what kinds of important breakthroughs have been prevented because of these tragic artificial barriers? Who knows how many talented individuals were never able to blossom into the brilliant artists and engineers and scientific researchers that they could have been simply because they were born into poverty and blocked from participation by capitalism, racism, and other forms of gatekeeping and oppression. As Stephen Jay Gould said, "I am somehow less interested in the weight and convolutions of Einstein's brain than in the near certainty that people of equal talent have lived and died in cotton fields and sweatshops." What gives me some small hope as a creator is the anarchist spirit of creativity that manages to survive even in this oppressive environment of capitalism. There are artists who are still able to create brilliant works of independent art, and there are amateur scientists and engineers who still manage to build incredible inventions in the garages and makerspaces of the world against these overwhelming odds. Imagine what we could accomplish if the greed-fueled gatekeeping of capitalism were done away with entirely. Chapter 14. Time is currently money. As Peter Coffin says in his book Custom Reality and You, under capitalism, everything is labor.
In our current societal perspective, if you're doing work because you want to do work, it's not viewed as work, it's viewed as a hobby. And I think a lot of the things that we do right now that we consider hobbies, that we consider not real work, are ultimately actually kind of work. It's just that the perspective we exist in is so utterly co-opted by capitalism. There is a realism that everything has to be done in a manner that serves to create profit.
In the United States, the first question we usually ask a stranger is, "What do you do?" And what we mean, of course, is what do you do for money? Because in capitalist society, value is so tied up with money, and so much of our time is spent earning money to survive, that we're brainwashed into believing that the work we do for money somehow defines us as individuals.
In my second life, I was also a paper salesman, and I was also named Dwight.
The fact is, we are all, every one of us in the working class, so much more than the jobs we do to benefit the capitalist class. We all have deeper capacity and potential to contribute to the species, to our culture, and to our communities. Ironically, it tends to be what we do for money that holds us back more than anything else from doing what we really want to do. Almost all of us in the working class wish desperately that we had more time each day to do things that we care about much more than work. Whether it's spending time with our families, creating art, or enjoying our hobbies, time is a vital resource, our most important resource. And under capitalism, we're forced to sacrifice more than half of our time on this planet serving the profit needs of our capitalist employers. Chapter 15. After the bread has been secured. I've talked about Pyotr Kropotkin a lot on this channel. He's one of my favorite political philosophers, and his book, The Conquest of Bread, is an incredibly forward-thinking template for how anarchist society might function. If you dig this video series, you should really check it out. It's free and it's all over the place on the internet. I'll put a link in the description. Kropotkin was well aware of the importance of subjective needs. He was a scientist himself, and he wrote, "We see that the worker, compelled to struggle painfully for bare existence, is reduced to ignorance of these higher delights, the highest within man's reach, of science, and especially of scientific discovery, of art, and especially of artistic creation. It is in order to obtain these joys for all, which are now reserved to a few, in order to give leisure and the possibility of developing intellectual capacities, that the social revolution must guarantee daily bread to all. After bread has been secured, leisure is the supreme aim." When Kropotkin talks about leisure, he isn't talking about just sitting around the couch and watching Better Call Saul, though that's certainly a component of leisure. But he's talking about subjective needs. Kropotkin loved the arts and the sciences, and he believes strongly that every human being on Earth should have access to the tools, time, and space needed to create. Kropotkin envisioned creator-owned and operated associations to fulfill our subjective needs. Then we shall see art associations. He who wishes for a grand piano will enter the association of musical instrument makers, and by giving the association part of his half-day's leisure, he will soon possess the piano of his dreams. If he is passionately fond of astronomical studies, he will join the association of astronomers, and he will have the telescope he desires by taking his share of the associated work. Kropotkin knew that the key to developing such art associations is time. He knew that capitalists rob workers of precious free time by forcing us to toil long hours for little pay, stripping away the value of our labor in the form of profits, so that what little free time we have left at the end of the work week must be spent resting and recouping energy so that we can begin work again the next week. Kropotkin believed that in an anarchist society, having more free time would allow for more people to engage in creative expression within the arts and the sciences. In short, the 5 or 7 hours a day which each will have at his disposal after having consecrated several hours to the production of necessities will amply suffice to satisfy all longings for luxury, however varied. Thousands of associations would undertake to supply them. What is now the privilege of an insignificant minority would be accessible to all. Pay close attention to the words Kropotkin uses. In his mind, concepts of art and science and luxury and leisure are all extensions of one core idea. We can call them subjective needs. And Kropotkin believed that if the oppressive systems of capitalism were dismantled, then we would all have far more free time and energy to pour into our passions, which would create a boundless atmosphere of creative activity, along with more fulfilling lives of leisure and activity with our families and with our friends. There's a lot more to be said for how anarchism would allow us to live these fulfilling lives, but I'm afraid this is all the time we have for now. In the next part of this series, we'll talk about how we can build institutions that will allow us to enjoy not just artistic and scientific pursuits, but leisure activities as well. And hell, maybe we'll even have room for a little luxury after the bread has been secured. Subscribe now so you don't miss it. I'm American Johnson. This is NonCompete. Thanks for watching.
So anyway, this guy John Billington was a separatist. Now we know a few things about him. We know that he offended Miles Standish, who was a mercenary who the separatists met in Holland. If you'll recall, they were in Holland. And they hired him to be their military commander. Now Miles Standish was considered by William Bradford, who was like the dungeon master of the colony. He was considered to be a good guy by the Pilgrims. But the strangers, but here's the deal. Actually, Miles Standish was brutally oppressive. And every time they encountered Indians, he would send over a military party to intimidate them. So in this context, let me introduce you to a man named John Billington.